Hi, so we've just had a sort of developer update from Hazzikostas, otherwise known as Watcher, newly promoted to Assistant Game Director. Now, he's come out with a couple of things. He's posted something very recently on the Blizzard forums and also done like a mock Q&A where he goes through some of the features that are coming in the beta, which is coming out on Thursday in case you haven't already heard. So in a couple of days, it's going to be a large wave going out, and then Thursday in the US, I think probably it's going to realistically work out Friday in Europe, and people further east. There's going to be a full-on beta. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few things. I'm not going to go through a blow-by-blow count of everything that was discussed. Some of the things that were discussed I've been doing in videos anyway. Some of them are just reminders from what was said at BlizzCon. I mean, that is a point in itself. Essentially, the features that they revealed at BlizzCon are basically in the game. It's not like World of Warcraft where they said a certain number of things were going to be in and then they were cut. They've done they've had more time for Legion, of course, because they did it in parallel with WoD. There's only one thing I can think of off the top of my head that has changed, and it's not like a chunk of content or anything. And I'd mentioned this in the order hall video I did the other day, and it's simply that they were talking in at BlizzCon about the different ways of getting to your order hall. Like they were going to have something class specific, like a hunter being picked up by an eagle and taken to their order hall, and various things like that, because you're going to be able to port to your order hall from wherever. Of course, that's now not the case. I think it was just considered too much quality of life. So you go to Dalaran or go to wherever your order hall is in the world if you want to get to your order hall. But apart from that, the actual content itself that they revealed at BlizzCon, as far as I can tell, is all still in. So that's good. That's positive. So if you already knew what was said at BlizzCon, or if you watched my videos from that time, then there's nothing really to add. So I'm not going to add it here. I'm only going to talk about things for which I have got some comments to make, if you see what I mean. So I'm just going to go through my list. The other thing just to mention about the beta, of course, it's very late. A lot of people expected it much earlier. At BlizzCon, they did sort of say that beta would be coming out before the end of the year, and of course it didn't. And there was a lot of arguments about that. Well, not a lot of arguments. I think some disappointment is more to the point. They have actually said here that they had intended to do it. It wasn't like them stringing people along. They had actually intended, but it wasn't quite ready enough. Which was a little strange, because if it wasn't ready to come out in November, which is when they say they wanted to bring it out, BlizzCon wasn't much before that, so very odd that they didn't know that. But for whatever reason, it really doesn't matter. But it is now out, it's coming out. They now think it's ready enough. It's still not complete. I mean, if it was complete, I'd be disappointed that it's not coming out much sooner. But it's now in a much more complete situation. There will be bugs. Now, just to warn you, if any of you get beta invites, and maybe you've not been in betas before, just to warn you. First of all, when they try rolling out the beta, it may not go right first time. There might be long delays logging in. Don't plan on being able to get in on Thursday or Friday or whenever. When you get in, there might be a lot of server instability. This is quite common. There's a huge influx of players who are all going to be going in. Some quests may not work. I mean, just this week, for example, I was doing quests that were fine a few months ago and a bug now. Every time a new build goes in, they might fix some bugs somewhere and it might break something somewhere else. So you just need to be patient. Don't think of it as like starting a new game, because it's not. It is still testing. It's going to be called beta now, not alpha, but it's still going to have bugs. There's still going to be issues with server stability. There's still going to be issues with all sorts of things. So just bear that one in mind. So things they did discuss. They discussed the differences between the order hall and the garrisons. I've just done a video on order halls a couple of days ago. I'm not going to go over that again. And one interesting thing, I say interesting, just from my point of view, cynical really. The question was asked from the sort of mock interviewer, Jesse Cox, what, in terms of the garrison, what he said was about customization, essentially. And it's certainly true. People like the idea of customization. I think what he said was people liked the fact that in your garrison you could customize various things. I'm not quite sure he was reading the same feedback that I was, because I think one of the real negative bits of feedback was that you couldn't customize it enough. You could decide, you could say, okay, I'll move my inn from there to there and put my stables there or whatever you've got. But there was so little customization. And people who've maybe played MMOs where you have player, because that's what people want, player housing, where you have loads of customization options, and that's not what garrisons were. And I think that was a big disappointment factor. Now, order halls are not that at all. In fact, just looking at order halls, I think they've gone out of their way to make them as different to garrisons as they could. It is certainly not a continuation of garrisons. In the same way that if you played at Mists of Pandaria, if you think about it, garrisons themselves were an extenuation of the farm. The farm was a very basic garrison, really. The garrison followed on from the farm. The order hall is not following on from the garrison. It's clear that the garrison has been a failed project. And because it's not your own personal space, you're sharing it with other players of the same class. What customization could there ever be? There can't. So this is not player housing. Garrisons were not player housing, and we're not going to get it now. So again, they talked about, class fantasy. It's grates on me now, that term. I'm not going to talk. There wasn't very much about classes that were mentioned. Interestingly, he did say, I didn't know this, he said that actually when he first started playing World of Warcraft, when he was playing in the beta and so on, when he came to actually play, he wanted to play a paladin, he says. But I think he lacked the negotiating skills to persuade his mates to play alliance. He ended up as horde, so he played a shaman, I think he said. But I think that was it. In terms of classes, he just explained a bit about that and a bit about the sort of storyline. He did make one interesting feature, which I'm not entirely agreeing with, where he said he seemed to imply that he's quite happy to abandon gameplay for the sake of class fantasy. Now, the problem there is, although role play is very important, I play a paladin, and I keep promising I'm going to do a video on why I play Retribution Paladin. That will be coming out next week, or later this week, but I think probably next week now that beta's coming out. I've got to start again, because with the beta there's going to be character wipes, but I don't think there's going to be character copies. I am hoping there are, but I don't think so. So I think I've just got to level everything up again. So I play a paladin for sort of role play reasons, so I'm well on board with that. But he did sort of imply that they're quite happy to abandon gameplay for class fantasy. And the thing is then, what one person thinks fits their class fantasy does not agree with another person, so it's really dodgy. I personally think the gameplay has to make sense above and beyond anything else. Yes, you want role-playing elements in as well, but because they are far more divisive, quite frankly, you need to make sure that doesn't act against gameplay. But that's my view. He's got a different view. And there we are. The levelling up process, now this is an obvious thing to talk about, but they did mention it, is he's acknowledged that the levelling up process is really bad, that especially when you get heirlooms on there, you're one-shotting mobs, and it's a bit crap. He says the ideal time he reckons for killing a mob is around about 12 seconds. At level cap, not so much earlier on, because you've only got like one spell, although they say that as if that's a natural feature. I don't know why you only have one spell when you start off a game. It didn't used to be like that, did it? I know you didn't have loads, but you didn't just start off with one spell when World of Warcraft first came out. But they say that it's too quick at the moment, and it's not a good leveling experience. And one of the main problems I've identified, which of course we've identified for many years, is the fact that as each expansion comes out, they make it quicker and quicker to level through the previous content, because who wants to spend 6 months leveling? And you're doing quests, you're following a story in a zone, and then you out-level that zone, and you haven't finished the story, you haven't even got halfway through it, especially if you're mixing dungeons into it. That's for those who are even questing out in the world. So they say they want to tackle that, and one of the ways they could tackle that is with the scaling features that are coming in Legion, whereby you can go into any zone, and that's certainly something I think they should do. Now, I've said this before, but I'll say it again here, is one thing I think they should do is you should always have to do the new content zones to level up in. So in Legion, for example, level cap is 110. So leveling from 100 to 110, you should have to do on the Broken Isles. No arguments about that. But the ideal would be that when you're leveling from 1 to 100, you can do that in any zone. So you can go to whatever zones you like, explore the world, and if you like a zone and you like a quest chain in that zone, you can complete it, and that's fine. I don't think that's what he was talking about. I mean, for a start, this wouldn't be in Legion anyway. I think they're thinking ahead to the next expansion with this. But I think what he was implying is that each zone would cover a greater range. So it would scale to a certain extent, but not necessarily every old zone would scale for any level up to the old level cap, which is what I think would be better. But it's interesting that they have said that, so that shows that they are thinking along the same lines that I am, and I think many others are as well. But not something probably for Legion, unless it's very late on in Legion, perhaps for the following expansion. But that would be quite positive. Talked about cinematics. Now, the cinematics in World of Draenor were really good. In particular, the Talador one was my favourite. I think it would be Talador was the absolute best one. I replay that still. I sometimes go to my garrison and just replay that. It's so awesome. And the music that went with it was amazing as well. And the Shadow Moon Valley one was good. I mean, I played Alliance at the start of WoD. I mean, I have done right, you know. But I've only just changed to Horde, really, this tier. And the Shadow Moon Valley one was brilliant as well. But all of them were good. And what they've said is you're not going to be able to see these cinematics until launch. Now, in Worlds of Draenor, they were viewable in beta. It was quite late on in beta. Certainly wasn't there for most of beta. So that might be a bit of a difference. So they're keeping it completely under wraps until the game launches, basically. And they said there's some really awesome... I mean, we don't need to be told that. We know that. But the implication is that they're even better in Legion. And I've no doubt about that. No doubt at all. Discuss race and class combinations. It's quite ironic. He said that there are certain race and class combinations that don't make sense, like Tauren Rogues, at the same time as he was making it sound like it makes sense to have Gnome Hunters. I'm not quite sure that he was on the same wavelength there. I'm not entirely sure it makes sense to have gnomes at all. But yeah, he seems to think it actually makes sense to have Gnome Hunters. I agree Tauren Rogues would be laughable. So what they're basically saying is they're not just going to open out any class, any race, which some people would like. But what he did say about Demon Hunters is they were actually toing and froing about race choices for Demon Hunters. And what they said is they settled in the end on just elves, so Night Elves for Alliance, Blood Elves for Horde, because he did it purely for, he said it's purely just because when you think of a Demon Hunter, you think of Illidan. That's the silhouette, that's the word he used when you think of Demon Hunters. But he also said, but there's nothing racial about them. There's nothing to stop them teaching their ways to other races as well. And he did strongly imply that that class would be open up to more race choices in the future. Whether that future is later on in Legion or again the following expansion when the Demon Hunter is no longer the new class and when maybe the class fantasy, if I can use that word without vomiting, is such a big deal. That's possibly what they mean. So again, I think they probably mean the following expansion. They'll open it up to a few more races. Now, of course, they're talking about the artifacts here. They mentioned they did the Ashbringer first, and it's obvious they did the Ashbringer first because it is the king of lore weapons, I think. I mean, some people will make an argument for Doomhammer, sure, and some people for Frostmourne, and Atish, possibly. But this one, absolutely. And the reason is because it's been mentioned all the way through the game. In vanilla, there were if you went to Eastern Plaguelands and quested in there, at Lights Hope Chapel, there was a guy who talked about Ashbringer. He was like, Ashbringer, nope, never heard of it, never heard of it. There was some rumour that got out that you could fish for it. Of course, it wasn't true. When they brought out Nax Ramus, they had a whole scene going on in Lights Hope Chapel itself discussing the Ashbringer. We had the little scene in TBC in Old Hillsbrad showing the cleansing of the crystal that was used to forge the Ashbringer. You know, it's cropped up time and again, time and again, time and again. And of course, the corrupted Ashbringer was obtainable from the original Nax Ramus. So it's no surprise to me that it is the first one they did. But I mean, my comment on that is I don't think they should have done. As much as, you know, it's great as a paladin player who can go right back to, I've played all the Warcraft games, but certainly from World of Warcraft vanilla, playing a paladin all the way through there, yeah. But if I'm thinking about it, the problem with it is you've got Ashbringer for the Retribution Paladins, great. And then Doomhammer for Shamans. Now, it makes less sense that Shamans get Doomhammer, because in order to give Shamans the Doomhammer, they've had to eviscerate Thrall. You know, Green Jesus has turned out to be a pleb, basically, and that doesn't sit right to me. And then what that then meant is they had to come up with 34 other artifacts that aren't really in the game. All right, sure, you make one of the Death Knight weapons out of the shards of Frostmourne. I mean, I thought we already used that to make Shadowmourne or whatever, I don't know. I wasn't really playing properly at the time anyway. But you're having to come up... At that point, I'd have just thought to myself, why don't... Okay, they want to give us a really powerful weapon, still use the same game mechanics of artifacts, but instead of actually giving us the Ashbringer and the Doomhammer, you know, let them stay where they were, and let us just craft a new legendary weapon type thing. You know, the start of a legend. Like, you know, Ashbringer hasn't existed for millennia. In the lore of the game, it's only existed for a couple of generations. Hasn't been around that long. A few decades, most. If that, not even that, is it? I struggle to keep time with where we are in the timeline, but it's not that long ago that the Ashbringer was even first forged. So it's not this, like, ancient legendary weapon or anything. So why couldn't we just create new ones? That would have made more sense. Anyway, that's just my view. But they did make... They talked about the fact, of course, they don't want everyone to have the same light. They don't want every Retribution Paladin to all be wielding the same weapon. They don't want loads of Ret Paladins all with the Ashbringer. So they had this cunning plan, which is to make everyone hate playing Retribution Paladins. No, I'm just kidding. What they said was, of course, this is about the different skins. So you can make your Ashbringer look different without transmogging it. You can transmog it as well. But without having to transmog it, you can make it look a little bit different. Now, I think that's true and it's not true. Here's where it's true. In theory, where I'm looking at it in the alpha, there's 16 different versions of the artifact you can have it looking like. With the possibility of more to come, because it's just an artwork job, isn't it? They can always develop more as the expansion rumbles on. And I'm quite sure they will do. I'd be very surprised if they don't. I'm sure they will. But in reality, although it's in theory 16 different versions, it's actually 4 different versions. And for each of those 4, there's 4 colour version variants. And the other thing, I mean, even that is still okay. That's still reasonable variation. But as they noted themselves in the developer update, and I've seen myself in alpha, some of these skins are easier to get than others. None of them are very, you know, you're going to have to do something to get any of them. You don't just get handed one on a plate. But some of them you'll get relatively quickly, and some of them you will not. Some of them you may never get. You know, unless you play lots of aspects of the game, you will never get all of them. So that reduces the variation, because what it means is most players are not going to do most of the content, because that's just the nature of the game. Most of the player base are fairly casual. So the actual number of variants for most players is going to be quite small. So there's still going to be a lot of duplication. So yeah, yes and no on that one in my view, but I don't think there's going to be enough variants as yet, unless they bring a lot more out later on. But I think they should bring more out for simpler achievements, just to get some variation in. But again, that's just my opinion. Mythic Plus was mentioned. This is the idea. Now, I will talk very briefly about this, because this was something that was mentioned at BlizzCon, but it's worth mentioning again because it's going to form such a big part of Endgame for like all players. And it's the Mythic Plus dungeons. So these are dungeons. You have like a keystone, which you get every week, and you use it to access some dungeons, and you've got to beat a timer. Now, what he was very clear to say here, they sort of said this at BlizzCon as well, but he's been even more explicit on this, which is great. What he said was the beating this timer, it's not the same as doing gold. What they said is it's somewhere around about silver, I think, maybe even between bronze and silver from the current challenge modes. But what he said in the developer update today, which is really important, is that it's only there to stop you trying to strong arm your way through it. In other words, rush at mobs, die, wipe, but you've killed a few of them, run back in, rah, blah, blah, blah. It's just to make sure that you are actually capable of completing that dungeon on that difficulty and not just ramming your head into a brick wall until it falls over or your head splits open. So it's a very straightforward timer to beat if you are actually able to do that difficulty. And what happens is, at the end of the week, you get a reward in your order hall, and this is already in the order hall now. There's a big chest, and you open it up, and it will reward you according to the best you did from the previous week. And then you get another keystone, you can use that for that week. And if you were beating your timers, then you get an upgraded keystone. And what these keystones do is they actually make the dungeon more difficult. And he says initially, like the lower level keystones, will just like give mobs extra health and let them do extra damage. And then a bit higher level, and there might be other little trickery involved, like, and higher level still, there are other ones. But they're random as to what it is. And we saw some of these at BlizzCon. It could include, for example, when you kill mobs, the other ones in the pack maybe do more damage. So maybe those are ones where you want to AoE them down at a steady rate. Or it might be the opposite. There might be some effect on it that means you actually do want to focus one down, then another, and so on. So you'd have to look at the abilities on the keystone that means the enemy mobs are going to have, and it will change the way you do the dungeon. So in actual fact, you might well get people. I won't be doing this now. You might well get people who'll do guides on dungeons, but there isn't really going to be a strategy guide for them with these keystones because the strategy will change according to the effects on this keystone. And each week, if you keep beating it, you keep leveling your keystone up, you're going to get better and better rewards, which means the players who are able to do the more difficult stuff. And he says, in theory as well, there is no cap. He says, realistically, there is a cap, because you will get to a point where it's just impossible to go up to the next level. But that's really good, the fact that dungeons, therefore, will then stay relevant, because on the one hand, the challenge will increase, and it's a lot better than like Mythic, because Mythic didn't really increase the challenge when the dungeons came out. It was the same dungeons, and if you had gear that was good enough to do Mythic, then it was just as easy as Heroics, really. Or that Heroics were when you were doing Heroics at the start, when you just leveled up. This is a lot better because, each week, okay, to begin with it might be quite straightforward if you're a really good player, but then each week it's just going to get harder and harder, and eventually you'll get to the right challenge for you, and you'll be getting rewards commensurate with that challenge. So there's definitely things to do outside of raiding. Now, I had talked about this before as well. It's a good thing and a bad thing. It's definitely a good thing because I think a lot of raiders left in Warlords of Draenor because although the raiding was great, the stuff to do outside of it was not. So there won't be that excuse now. Obviously, the flip side of that coin is it's extra things you have to do as raiders. But you can't have everything, can you? In terms of daily content, they touched on this, and I think it is important to do this. When I first started hearing about what's coming in Legion for level cap, my instant fear was I immediately compared Mists of Pandaria with Warlords of Draenor because they're as different can be. In Warlords of Draenor, you just had, what did you do to get to level cap? Your daily stuff was, okay, you did a challenge mode to get a piece of, 640 loot, something like that. And you did an Apexis daily or two, whatever. Not just to get Apexis crystals, but maybe some other things as well. Order resources. No, garrison resources then. Order resources in Legion. I keep mixing them up. And that was it. That was all there was to do. A challenge mode, maybe a heroic dungeon as well. But that was just, again, for garrison resources. And Apexis dailies, filling up a bar. Now, in Mists of Pandaria, it was no less annoying. In fact, it was more annoying for me personally, because you had to get there were reputations you needed to get in order to get gear and patterns for professions and things like that. Which meant doing dailies, lots of dailies, and they were the same dailies. There was very little variation in them. There was a little bit. There was not much variation in them. So when they said about all these different sort of world objectives at level cap, I immediately thought, is this going to be the same as Mr. Pandaria, where I'm doing the same bloody dailies every single day? And it's not, because I've tried them out now. There is a good range of things to do. Because what has definitely not worked is the fact that, you know, what I did is I did my Apexis dailies like a good little boy, and I did my challenge mode for like a couple of weeks, 2, maybe 3 weeks maximum. Then I didn't need them anymore. I had enough Apexis crystals to be able to start myself on the legendary quest line. After that, Sodom. Because by that stage, even the gear from them wasn't good enough for me, because I was raiding. And then the other side of it was the Apexis daily. Sorry, not the Apexis daily. The challenge modes. Again, at a certain point, all my gear was above 640 item level anyway. Didn't need them. So I just stopped doing everything. And there was no point in heroic dungeons, of course, because why would I need garrison resources? Didn't need them. Here, it's different. I mentioned in the order halls that we are going to need a lot of order resources. So the motivation to do these things is going to be there. And it's not all just go and fill up a bar. There are some stuff where you go and fill up a bar. That's still there. But my issue with Apexis dailies wasn't that content is crap. It's just that's all there was. Now there isn't. So you can go and do that. Or you can go and do like a more traditional quest. Or you can go and do a really tough mob where you'll need several people in on it. Or you can go and do some stuff in a dungeon. Or you can do pet battle. There's some stuff for gathering professions if you're a miner or a herbalist or skinner or whatever. There's fishing stuff. So there's a range of things you can do. Now, of course, in reality, you'll be better off doing all of them, but at least it's varied. And the other thing is, it's not just a new set each day. The other point they made here, and they've made this at BlizzCon, is if you miss a day, it's still there the next. You know, some of these things sort of roll on anyway. You're not necessarily getting badly behind if you miss a day or something like that. Or if you come home, he said, sometimes in Mr. Pandaria, he came home after a hard day at work and just felt he just wants to go to bed. But, oh my God, I've got to get the dailies done. And they said the aim is that you don't feel so much like that with this. You will still want to do them, though. Maybe make up for another night, though. It's not every night you want to be on it. And, of course, for a lot of people, you don't need to do it that regularly anyway. But from having done it myself, and I've done a video on level cap stuff as well, I have to say it does feel better. I can see myself doing it most days for a good few weeks without tearing my hair out in the way that I did in Mr. Pandaria. Literally, in Mr. Pandaria, once I got the last faction to Exalted, I said, I'm not doing another daily. Not doing any more. I did do a few on the Isle of Thunder, but I didn't do the old dailies anymore because I couldn't stand them. I mean, on that point, yeah, that's a good point. I just wrote in my notes here. He did mention that when the game feels like a chore or any aspect of the game, then it's not right. And that's quite right. And it is sometimes difficult because being an MMO, like, if it was just a game where, like a single player game, you buy the game and you've paid the money for it, the company that produced it ain't going to get any more money off you. They don't really care. There's no need for them to put time-gated stuff in. You just play the game. When you finished it, you finished it. Doesn't really matter. For this, it does. For an MMO, it doesn't. It doesn't matter whether it's a free-to-play model or a subscription model like WoW is. They want you to be playing regularly because that's how they're generating income. They don't want you just playing it for a month and buggering off, which, of course, a lot of people have been doing. So they're quite right to point out the fact, you know, that they don't need it to feel like a chore. They don't want people to not be enjoying the content they're doing. At the same time, they have to put some things in that sort of mean you're going to have to spend a certain amount of time doing what might be considered repetitive parts of the game. It is a difficult balance to get right. I'm not usually too harsh with Blizzard when they get it wrong, except with Apexis dailies I was, just simply because it should have been obvious right from the start that one type of content was never going to fly. Just seeing this here, I missed this myself, but on the MMO site it's got the outdoor areas in Warlords apparently were supposed to have multiple ways you could achieve the objectives for this, like the Apexis thing. But he says there's ended up being no real context to why you were doing things. And no, there wasn't. That was another problem with it, wasn't it? You just went, you had someone say, I've scouted out some things for you, Commander. You might want to take a look at this. And you go there. And you didn't look at it. You didn't read the text quest and go, oh, okay, that's a good reason for doing that. I'll go there. You looked at it and you said, which is the easiest? Which is the quickest one to do? You went out there, 15 minutes later, bosh, done. You didn't really care why you were doing it. There was no good reason for doing it. Is that necessarily absent in Legion? I don't know. I'm going to be honest. When you're doing the world objectives, you don't necessarily care about the region there, the reason there either. I just look at the map and I say, okay, that part of the map says I need to kill 12 of these things and one of this named mob, and I go there and do it. So I'm not sure that's necessarily changing in Legion. I think the big thing is it's the variety of content, the variety of different objectives to do. So, yeah. I mean, his note here, it says all the world quests have lore and a story that goes with them, giving you some context as to what you're doing there. Only if you read it. It's the same as any quest, isn't it? It's only if you read it. So some people will, some people won't. I do agree that the whole campaign thing makes a certain amount of sense. But I'm not going to say that Warlords of Draenor didn't. It's the same thing as well in theory, isn't it? In Warlords of Draenor, we were assaulting Draenor. We were invaders. On the Broken Isles, we're still effectively invaders. Technically, yes, we're defending our planet from the Legion who are invading our planet. But in terms of the Broken Isles, at the point at which the Legion starts, technically they're already camped on the Broken Isles and we're going there. There's no civilization there. Aetrig you might see if you remember him from Warcraft 3. Apparently he's in. But there's no groups of people there. We are technically invading that group of islands. So it's the same motivation as our characters had for Warlords of Draenor. We're invading a place as a preemptive strike against people who want to invade our world. So I think it just remains the same. I think maybe what they're trying to do is just be really open and say we've got a load of things wrong in Warlords that we're not getting wrong here. And sometimes I think they're saying they got some things wrong in Warlords that actually they probably didn't, but they're just saying they did anyway, just to, I don't know, apologise where apologies aren't always necessary. Not everything in Warlords of Draenor was done badly. So those are the topics that were covered, in so much as I have anything additional to add myself. I'll of course put a link to where you'll be able to find more details of this if you haven't seen it yourself. If you found it useful, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. The usual features. If you've got any specific comments, then by all means put them in the comments below. If you've got any questions, put them in the comments below. Share it with anyone else you think might be interested. And until next time, as always, I'll see you later.